Merhaba, Diyalektik ve Marksizm konferansımıza hoş geldiniz. Georgi Lukacs'ın Tarih ve Sınıf Bilinci eserinin ve Karl Korsch'un Marksizm felsefe çalışmasının 100. yılını kutluyoruz, anıyoruz diyelim. Dolayısıyla bu vesileyle bir konferans yapmaya karar verdik. Tabii ki çok alışılageldik bir konferans formatı içerisinde olmadığımızı peşinen kabul ediyoruz. Biz de hem yabancı katkıları aldığımız hem Türkiye'den bu alanlarda çalışan çok değerli dostlarımız, arkadaşlarımız, yoldaşlarımız var. Onların da katkılarını da almak isterdik. Daha canlı bir konferans tabii ki hem YouTube'dan yayınlanacak hem canlı olarak da gerçekleştiğimiz bir konferans olmasını isterdik. Fakat doğrusu söylemek gerekirse herhangi bir şekilde bir akademik çerçeve içerisinde gerçekleştirilen bir konferans değil bu. Dolayısıyla aslında büyük oranda Marksist teoriyle veya uluslararası işçi hareketinin tarihsel tartışmalarıyla ilgili devrimci militanların düzenlediği bir konferans olarak görebiliriz. Dolayısıyla herkes gönüllü olarak çalıştı ve son derece kısıtlı imkanlarla herhangi bir bütçeye sahip olmadan yaptığımız bir etkinlik olarak bunu düşünebiliriz. Fakat bizim için esasen bu iki düşünürü, büyük düşünür Marksist teorinin iki önemli simasını hem anmak hem çalışmalarını tekrar hatırlamak istedik. Lukacs ve Korsch'un bu çalışmaları aslında kendi dönemlerinin Marksist anlayışına, Marksizm'deki hakim anlayışa tekrar diyalektiği sokmak gibi bir öneme sahip oldu. Aslında bir diyalektik bir soluk verdiler. Neye göreydi? Bu tabii ki aslında İkinci Enternasyonel'de hakim olan Marksizm anlayışı ile bir tartışma içerisine girmişlerdi. İkinci Enternasyonel'in başlıca temsilcileri, bu anlayışın İkinci Enternasyonel Marksizminin başlıca temsilcileri o dönem Kautsky ve Planov'du. Aslında Alman Marksizminin ve Rus Marksizminin en önemli isimleri Lenin'in, Troçki'nin, Roza'nın da bunlar tabii ki büyük oranda üstadları olarak görünebilirdi. Fakat bu hakim anlayış içerisinde tarihsel maddeciliğin kendisi kaba, mekanik bir ekonomik determinizme, ekonomik belirlenimciliğe indirgeniyordu. Aslında diyalektik öncesi bir maddeciliğe bir geri dönüş sayılabilirdi. Ve bu anlayış içerisinde aynı zamanda bununla paralel olarak tıpkı doğa bilimlerinde olduğu gibi tarihin de kendi yasaları olduğu, sabit yasaları olduğu ve bu yasalar uyarınca da aslında farklı tarihsel evrelerin birbirini kaçınılmaz olarak takip edeceği ve kapitalizm aşamasından sonra da sosyalizmin de kaçınılmaz olarak geleceği anlayışı mevcuttu. Böyle bir anlayış ise tabii ki kitlelerin örgütlü ve bilinçli müdahalesine de pek yer kalmıyordu. Dolayısıyla aslında Marx'ın da ifade etmiş olduğu praksis anlayışına, yani insanların ve insanların bilinciyle nesnel koşulların dönüşümünün birbirini belirlediği, birbirini karşılıklı olarak beslediği ve etkilediği anlayışı tümüyle bir kenara bırakılmış oluyordu. Tabii ki bu ideolojik çerçeve içerisinde, ideolojik cendere diyebiliriz, den bir şekilde kurtulmayı başaran çeşitli düşünürler oldu Lukacs ve Korsch'tan önce. Ama bunlar daha çok aslında siyasal strateji alanında veya politik analiz çerçevesindeydi. Burada tabii ki işte yine Lenin'i, Troçki'yi, Rosa Luxemburg'u saymak durumundayız. Lenin Nisan tezleriyle birlikte, Troçki eşitsiz ve bileşik gelişme yasası ve sürekli devrim anlayışıyla birlikte aslında tekrar stratejiyi bir şekilde devreye sokmuşlardı ve Rus devriminin sınıfsal dinamiklerini ve siyasal stratejisini aslında bu ilerlemeci anlayıştan bir şekilde koparak ifade etmeyi başarmışlardı. Rosa Luxemburg ise 1915'te tam yani Birinci Dünya Savaşı'nın başlarında Julius broşürüyle birlikte tam bütün insanlığın aslında bir barbarlığa sürüklendiği evrede ya sosyalizm ya barbarlık diyerek aslında tarihin böyle tek yönlü bir yoldan ilerlemediği, burada çeşitli kavşakların bulunduğu ve önemli olanı burada öznenin, yani kitlelerin ve kitlelerin tabii ki siyasal ifadesi olan Devrimci Parti'nin eyleminin kendisinin, bilinçli eyleminin kendisinin önemli olduğunu, belirleyici olduğunu vurguluyordu. Onun için aslında bu anlayışa ve Lukacs ve Korsch'un da aslında felsefi alanda tekrar tartışmaya sokacağı bu anlayışa bir özne-nesne diyalektiği diyebiliriz veya öznel faktör diyalektiği. Yani öznenin kendisinin, ki diyalektikte özne ile nesne arasındaki bu karşıt, yer yer gerilimli birliğin kendisi önemlidir. Bu özne-nesne diyalektiğini tekrar felsefi alana soktular. Bu açıdan da bu çok ciddi bir kırılma, bir tartışma. Lukacs sonrasında bu çalışmasını inkar etmek durumunda kaldı belli bir dönem. Korsch'ta çok ciddi baskılara uğradı. Ciddi tartışmalar yaratmış ama birçok insanın da sonrasında çok da fazla etkilemiş olan temel eserlerdir bu eserler ki Marksizm'de felsefede tarih ve sınıf Bilinci'nde Yılmaz Öner tarafından Türkçe'ye çevrilmişti. Bu eserleri dolayısıyla anmak istedik. Dolayısıyla ben daha fazla da uzatmak istemiyorum. Şimdi bizlere öncesinde kaydederek videolarını yollamış olan, katkıda bulunan sevgili dostlarımıza geçmek istiyoruz. İlk konuşmacımız Mikhail Löwy olacak. Mikhail Löwy Türkiye'de az çok biliyoruz. Çok sayıda çalışması yayınlandı. Yani Marx'tan Walter Benjamin'e, ekososyalizmden gerçeküstücülüğe, Marx'ın ve din ilişkisine kadar çok sayıda çalışması, makalesi Türkçe'de de bulunabiliyor. Şimdi Mikhail Löwy'i dinliyoruz.
Well, let us say a few words about Geschichte und Klassenbewusstsein, History and Class Consciousness, published 100 years ago by Georg Lukacs. Well, just few words on how Lukacs arrived at this work in 1923. Yeah? Lukacs started in being mainly interested in cultural and literary issues, but he developed during these early years, from 1914 to 1918, let's say, a kind of a romantic anti-capitalist critique of capitalism. This is very clear in his early writings. He is critical of capitalism, but from a romantic perspective related to pre-capitalist values. And this is even apparent in his first Marxist or communist writings, like Ancient and New Culture. When he says that capitalism destroyed culture, which existed in pre-capitalist times, and socialism will bring about a new culture. So, and this anti-capitalist element is still present in Geschichte und Klassenbewusstsein, but in a much less obvious way. Now, history and class consciousness is a unique piece. There's no other work in Marxist philosophy who had such a deep and lasting influence. Not well beyond the borders of Central Europe or the 1920s. It became a decisive reference for a vast amount of thinkers, very different between them, such as Ernst Bloch, Karl Mannheim, the whole Frankfurt School, Theodor Adorno, Walter Benjamin, Herbert Marcuse, but also Maurice existentialists such as Maurice Merleau-Ponty, Jean-Paul Sartre, and other Marxists like Henri Lefebvre, Lucien Goldman, Karel Kosik in Czechoslovakia, Adolfo Sanchez Vasquez in Mexico, and my friend Roberto Schwartz in Brazil, among others. Among others. And it is a book that is still avidly being read, studied, and discussed and criticized today, 100 years after its publication. And it is indeed a remarkable piece because it is a synthesis, a dialectical synthesis, an Aufhebung, yes, between ethics and politics, subject and object, future and present, between the final goal and the immediate circumstances. let us recall just 2 or 3 main points of Geschichte und Klassenbewusstsein. First, the dialectical category of totality. That's very important. There is one phrase where Lukacs writes, "What is orthodox Marxism?" And he says, what distinguishes Marxist method from bourgeois science is not the predominance of economic factors. It is a dialectical category of totality. And this is very, very important. So this opens a new way of understanding Marxism, completely different from the vulgar Marxism of the Second International and of so many others. Yeah? And the second very important point is, of course, a critique of reification, how capitalism transforms everything into a thing, a commodity, including human relations, law, the state, culture, everything becomes a commodity, becomes a thing. Yeah? So this is very important contribution, of course, based on Marx, etc., but it's a new interpretation. And the third is what he says about the consciousness of the proletariat, that the proletariat class is the only one who, achieving the highest degree of consciousness, zugerechnetes Bewusstsein, he is able to have an understanding of the totality of the historical process, the dialectics of the historical process in its totality. No other class can achieve this. Yeah? Also, this is a very important contribution, among others. Yeah, many other things, but I'm just referring to these three. One, because I think they were really decisive, and they are some of the elements which make that history and class consciousness was a turning point in the history of Marxist thinking in the 20th century. A turning point, a break with the dominant Marxism of the time, which was the Marxism of the Second International, and to some extent also of the Third International, people like Zinoviev, Bukharin, and the others. So it was really starting something new, which will become, call it Western Marxism or call it dialectical Marxism, as you wish, throughout the 20th century. Yeah? Of course, one of the interesting things in history and class consciousness was that he was able to integrate the contribution of the German social sciences. While rejecting their bourgeois limitations, he was able to integrate some aspects of their thinking. People like Georg Simmel, and Tönnies, and particularly Max Weber. And the young Lukacs knew personally Max Weber. They were friends. He took part in the seminar which Weber organized at his home in years 1912 to 14. And they still remain in contact. And one clearly see several elements which were taken from Weber in Geschichte und Klassenbewusstsein. This is why Maurice Merleau-Ponty says that Lukacs is a Weberian Marxist. But this should not be interpreted as a kind of eclectic combination, because Lukacs is basically a Marxist thinker. Yeah? But he was able to integrate some elements from Weber in his thinking. For instance, the concept of reification, you can find some aspects of Weber's more critical remarks about the purely quantitative and sachlich, reified nature of capitalism. And also the connection between Protestantism and capitalism. For Lukacs in Weber, he quotes Weber, is a good example of reification. Yeah, it means for the Protestant believer, there is no way to control his economic activity. It depends on something completely unpredictable, like divine providence, but divine providence just a way of giving form to the reification. Yeah? Now, and also from the methodological perspective, concepts like consciousness of the proletariat, they have something to do with an ideal type in the Weberian sense. Yeah? Lukacs says you don't find the true class consciousness, zugerechnetes Bewusstsein, empirically. Yeah? It's an ideal type, it's a construction. Yeah? And it's an objective possibility. It is also a Weberian category. Yeah? So you can say that some important elements in Weber are, in Lukacs, sorry, are borrowed from Weber. Of course, he rejects Weber bourgeois approach and his non-dialectical method, and of course they're wide apart politically and philosophically, but at the same time, Lukacs was able to take from Weber some insights which are important and bring them into his reflection in history and class consciousness. Yeah? So now a few words about how Lukacs reacted to the criticism which was launched against him. Yeah? Now, immediately after the book was published, a few months or 1 year later, he was the object of several critical comments from social democrats on one side and from communists on the other. He didn't pay attention to the social democrats, but he decided to answer to the communist critics. And he did this in a paper, very important paper called Schwostismus und Diyalektik, which is a kind of philosophical political continuation of history and class consciousness. It's a text which Lukacs didn't publish and was discovered a few years ago and published, and so now we can take knowledge of it. And I think it's very important because it shows that at least during the first years, Lukacs didn't give up his views. It's political and his philosophical. And this document, Schwostismus und Diyalektik, it's an answer to Abraham de Borin and Laszlo Ruders, a Russian and a Hungarian communist philosophers, who criticized history and class consciousness as being purely idealist and subjectivist, while Marxism is a science of the objective course of history. Yeah? So Lukacs reacts against this as a positivist, vulgar, materialist approach, which has nothing to do with the spirit, revolutionary spirit of Marxist dialectics. And you oppose this a revolutionary dialectical perspective where the subjective movement is very important. Yeah? The subjective moment being class consciousness, organization, political initiative, vanguard party, etc., etc. This is so. He says, in the moment of crisis and revolution, the Augenblick, yeah, the subjective element is the decisive. Yeah? It's not the objective movement of the economy that decides. No, it's the subjective moment which is decisive. Yeah? So it is. So this is a passionate dialectic defense of history and class consciousness from the perspective of a, let's say, dialectical view of the revolutionary process and the importance of the subjective moment. And he rejects the views of his critics, De Boren and Drude, as being a form of positivism, pseudo-scientific view, and as being a form of schwostismus. This is a curious expression, meaning from the Russian Schwost, which means the queue, Schwanz in German. So these people, instead of being the vanguard of the historical process, they are at the queue. They wait for things to happen and then they join the movement. This is what they are proposing the Communist Party to do. And Lukács used this term, from which it appears in Lenin, in What is to be Done of Lenin, to criticize their approach, that the Marxists should follow the objective course of history instead of being in the vanguard and intervening in the process through organization and revolutionary initiative. So this was written in 1925. In my view, it has no date, but I think it's 1925. Lukács tried to publish it, but could not. He couldn't find a journal. He tried to publish it in Russia, but it didn't work. And he soon gave it up. Why didn't he try to publish it later? Because I think he changed his views. He changed his views in 1926 in a piece called Moses Hess and the Utopian Idealism or something like that, where he criticized Moses Hess, but beyond Moses Hess, he criticized all kinds of utopian and subjective views of socialism, and opposing to this the objective realism of Hegel. So there is a philosophical change, which is also political one, because it means his acceptance of socialism in one country of Stalin. Now, Lukács, a few years later, not immediately, a few years later, he will start a series of self-criticisms of Geschichte und Klassenbewusstsein. The first one which I found in 1934, which is a terrible critique. He said this book is purely idealistic and therefore dangerous because idealism leads immediately to fascism. Something quite absurd. And he will develop several such criticisms, and he will forbid the book to be published. It wasn't republished for dozens of years. Couldn't find it. So only in the 60s he accepted that it be published again and translated, but insisted to publish an introduction where he explains what is wrong in the book. And I think these criticisms are not really very relevant. I think the book is really still today a very important starting point to think about history, class consciousness, revolutionary politics, the dialectical method, capitalist reification. It is still very, very much relevant. Of course, the political situation is not the same of 1923, but the basic theoretical, philosophical, methodological elements are still very much relevant. Yes, very much relevant. So I think history and class consciousness 100 years later is still a very good starting point to think about capitalism and about the revolutionary alternative to it.
Evet, Mikhail Löwy'ye çok teşekkür ediyoruz katkısı için. Bir sonraki sunumumuz Tijana Okic'in olacak. Tijana Okic Boşnak bir filozof, Marksist filozof. Ve bize bu sunumunda Tarih ve Sınıf bilinci eserinin aslında Leninist köklerine dönmeyi öneriyor Tijana. Şimdi kendisini dinliyoruz.
Hello, everybody, and I would like to extend my Bosnian greetings to all my comrades in Turkey and all the comrades, hopefully, who will be there from other parts of the Balkans, I hope. And I do want to say that increasingly, one of the things that I'm increasingly interested in is the kind of common history, if we can put it that way, of all the states or countries which were formed after the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire. And I think that as kind of those parts of the world, we have a lot of joint work to do and a lot of alliances to forge, which unfortunately quite often seems not to be the case, but I'm hoping that the future will bring different kinds of contacts. I thank you all for the invitation, and I think it is a wonderful opportunity, and I regret not being able to be with you. Knowing that the situation in your country, like in the rest of the world, is increasingly disastrous, dangerous, and that we are living on the brink of world conflict, which hopefully won't happen, but the situation from different fronts of this world and different wars is becoming increasingly dangerous, and we are living in a kind of permanent state of warnings and some people would say catastrophes. I don't like this word. And it is precisely because I don't like the word catastrophe that I want to say a couple of words about a book which we all know about, a philosopher which we have all read, namely the Hungarian philosopher Jerzy Lukács, who is, in my view, the greatest Marxist philosopher of the 20th century. There have been other Marxist thinkers, of course, great Marxist philosophers, but Lukács, I believe, has been more systematic and more wide than other philosophers. We are in the year 2023. That is the 100th anniversary of the publication of History and Class Consciousness, arguably one of the most important works of Marxist philosophy, not just in 20th century, but Marxist philosophy tout court. The book, who has in various ways shaken the world in various different ways at various different times and has been received differently, of course. I do want to say that quite often, and in particular in the countries of the so-called West, there has been an attempt, which I believe is still happening, to reduce Lukács simply and merely to this book. Therefore, to freeze Lukács, as it were, to freeze his thought to history and class consciousness, as if his thoughts did not develop further, as if he did not develop his philosophy further, and as if he hadn't written up until the end of his very, very long life. As you all know, Lukács lived quite a long and fulfilled life, like did Ernst Bloch, his friend from youth and over. Why I think the history and class consciousness is still relevant. I don't want to focus on what today are, I think, predominantly views which repeat ad infinitum the importance of the categories of reification, that we are all commodities. Of course, that is the condition of modernity, that we are all commodities, and this condition persists. But I'm interested in more, in its more political aspects, namely, precisely because I think that within the history and class consciousness and within the Lukács's later production, politics and philosophy cannot be separated. Now, I don't want to say that one can reduce his philosophy to his politics, nor that one can reduce his politics to his philosophy, because the changes have been have been immense. I do want to state that History and Class Consciousness is one of the two books at the time of Marxist philosophy. The first one was Ernst Bloch's The Spirit of Utopia, is a book which attempts to think and grasp the October Revolution. So it is a book of October Revolution in a way. It is a book about the October Revolution. It is a book about revolution. And therefore, if the first parts, the first essays of the book can be said to have more philosophical grounding, the second parts of the book, in particular, the last couple of essays, are more Leninist in their philosophical and political aims and outlooks. One of the most important Leninist essays, which was actually written in 1920, so soon after Lukacs's Lukacs becoming a communist, as it were, is the essay entitled Legality and Illegality. Now, this is an essay which is important not just because it covers what quite often in Marxist theory we call the organizational question, therefore the question of the party, but it is also a question which opens, that is an essay which opens an important philosophical problem, which I believe is at the basis or the very foundation of the history and class consciousness, namely the problem of, on the one hand, particularity, and on the other hand, universality. Therefore, what I think that Lukacs has attempted to do throughout the book, and not least in this essay, is precisely to argue for the actuality of revolution that continues, therefore, in such a way to pose the question, what is the relevance of the communist movement as a movement which departs, as it were, from one particular position, from a particularity, and has to become universality? Okay, so that's the question that Lukacs's History and Class Consciousness, and this essay in particular, opens. I think that this is particularly relevant. So the point is, how can a particular point of view, that of the working class, become universal? And this is the idea that he expresses precisely throughout the essay Legality and Illegality. And why is this essay particularly important? I think because it affirms the historical actuality of revolution, but it also poses the question, and I think this is a particularly important question for Marxists, of the Marxist theory of the state. And I think today it is quite clear that we live in an epoch which sees increasingly that the power of the states is reduced and helpless faced with the capital. Another thing that is relevant, and why I think this essay helps us to think the actuality of revolution and to think with Lenin, as it were, is precisely because Lukacs here, at the very beginning of the essay, takes the question of the importance of the concrete, what Lenin called the concrete analysis of the concrete situation. Now, why I think this is important, it is quite clear to everybody today that two preconditions which Lukacs mentions, and I will read them because I have opened the book there. Two preconditions, therefore, the revolution in the system of production, and the other, that it is clear to the masses that the existing order is not the only possible order. So we are living these two conditions. They are fulfilled in a way. But what we do not have, and what we continue to, in a way, as a left, to have problems with, is precisely our own understanding of the state and therefore of our own understanding of organizations in relation to that state. In that sense, I think the essay on legality and illegality should also be read as Lukacs's kind of own attempt to revise his previous position, for which he was criticized, that is, of refusing the parliamentary struggle. But I do not want to say that the organizational question can entirely be reduced to the parliamentary struggle. Therefore, the question is much wider, precisely because the philosophical idea which he developed in the earlier essay, that is of reification, is also relevant for the political organization, or for the generally our way of conceiving political organizations. Therefore, in a reified world, it is very difficult to conceive of a political organization which would not be affected by the reification as a relation which subtracts all relations, as it were. Therefore, I think that my initial kind of plea for the people of the Balkans, as it were, to find ways of being together, us, or share more than, for example, things that we share with Western countries, is one of the ways for political organizations to expand beyond their narrow limits, perhaps of their own nation states. Therefore, I would say that the philosophical question of universalization remains relevant. Another point I want to make is related to Lukacs's late interview, namely one of the last interviews, which I like to remember, which again is related to the issues of which he develops in the essay Legality and Illegality. And namely, today we live in a world which, as I said, is kind of, Gramsci would say, pregnant with revolution. The old is dying, but the new cannot be born. And this has been a kind of predicament and conjuncture for quite a while, I would say now. But we also live in a time where historical consciousness is increasingly disappearing. So if you think about what historical consciousness means, and this is also a theme of the essay Legality and Illegality, and the theme of the political organization for Lukacs. Therefore, the question of organization is inseparable from the question of consciousness, which is once again Leninist actually theme, although many people would say Weberian, but I think it's a Leninist theme that is present kind of throughout Lukacs's work. Any contact with people who are, let's say, 20 today, and one soon realizes that most of them don't even know what USSR was, for example. They don't have the idea of what it was. Certainly, I don't know about you, but for example, my father's grandparents were born in the 19th century. Therefore, my historical consciousness is quite different to somebody who is entirely kind of submerged into the present. And this obviously poses the organizational problems for the left generally. So if we live in a situation where, as I said, the state is increasingly weak, faced with capital, the state increasingly serves the capital, and if and when they take the universal healthcare from us, there is nothing but repression that remains. So therefore, the state is merely a repressive organ, and we are kind of increasingly moving in that direction. So one is the problem, therefore, of historical consciousness. And this is why my plea for renewal of the Leninist Lukacs, as it were, is, I think, not just a plea for the actuality of revolution, but for the very possibility of thinking Marxism in the times that are ahead of us. In the interview that I mentioned, Lukacs, already very old and therefore very experienced, although he had initial hopes that after 45, the Marxist philosophy and Marxist movement were gaining popularity in the West. We know increasingly that by 1980s, this was not the case. And therefore, Lukacs' entire later work, which is published mainly around 1980s, his final works remain actually not received precisely because the Soviet Union disintegrates and therefore Lukacs remains completely unknown. But what he says in this interview is quite important, I think, and it concerns us all. He says that we are in a situation when we need to behave as if the workers' movement was just being formed. So as if we were at the end of the 19th century. The entire history is at the same time in front of us, with the entire experience that's behind us. So we are at the same time in a peculiar kind of position where the history is open, the actuality of revolution is open, with the experience of the past that is behind us. And I think that more than anything else, this summarizes Lukacs' lifelong passion and his lifelong involvement in politics. And I want to finish kind of this talk by simply pointing out that I think the attempt to freeze Lukacs to history and class consciousness has remained limited precisely because we have forgotten to read the book in its Leninist aspects. And we have counterposed the book, or that is, we have turned the book into Lukacs versus the Frankfurt School. That's been the dominant reading, as it were, of this book. And it continues to be the dominant reading of this book. And it's more openly political aspects which try to think the Russian Revolution. So it is a book of Russian Revolution, about the Russian Revolution, have been sacrificed in the name of comparing Lukacs, as it were, or trying to compare him in various aspects with the Frankfurt School. And I think that in the future, the reading that is before all of us is the reading which will resuscitate precisely the Leninist elements of this book. Thank you very much.
Tijana'ya da çok teşekkür ediyoruz. Şimdi Ali Yalçın arkadaşımız, Ali Yalçın Göğmen dostumuzu dinleyeceğiz. Kendisi KYK'lı bir akademisyen, barış imzacısı. Uzun süredir zaten Korsch üzerine çalışıyordu. Şimdi Alman Devriminin izinde Korsch'un siyasal düşüncesi üzerine Ali Yalçın'ı izleyelim.
Merhaba. Alman Devriminin izinde Korsch'un siyasal düşüncesi isimli sunuşumla karşınızdayım. Bu sunuş çerçevesinde 1923 yılında yayınlanan Marksizm ve Felsefe kitabına hakim olan siyasal düşünceyi sizlerle tartışmaya çalışacağım. Tıpkı işte Lukacs'ın olduğu gibi Korsch da 1923 yılında bu büyük eserini yayınlıyor. Ve bu çalışma da bence dönemin siyasi olaylarıyla Alman devrimi olarak adlandırdığımız 1918'in Kasım ayından başlayıp 1923'ün sonlarına kadar süren dalga dalga gelen bir olaylar zinciriyle son derece alakalı. Yani bu kitap çerçevesinde devrimci işçi sınıfı hareketinin konseylerin ve partinin, bu Alman Komünist Partisi'nin muktedir olmasının yani devrimin gerçekleştirilmesinin de diyebiliriz bunu aslında, ekonomik dönüşüm ve politik mücadele olduğu kadar felsefik ve ideolojik mücadeleyi de içermesi gerektiği belirtiliyor. Devrimci mücadelenin bütüncüllüğü sayesinde hem bu üç alanın tamamını kapsayacak şekilde gerçekleştirilmesi sayesinde toplumsal dönüşümün gerçekleştirilmesi ve eski toplumun özelliklerinin, eski topluma ait yapıların ortadan kalkmasının söz konusu olabileceğini söylüyor. Yani bu bütüncülük olmadan devrim gerçekleştirilemez deniliyor ve hani bana kalacak olursa metnin ana fikri diyalektik düşüncenin devrim için vazgeçilmez olduğu, ancak devrimin gerçekleştirilmesi için de diyalektik düşünme biçiminin ve felsefenin, daha doğrusu teorinin diyelim, Korsch'un tabiriyle vazgeçilmez olduğu fikri. Şimdi bu fikrin ortaya atılması tabii bazı kesişimler sayesinde mümkün oluyor. Bunlardan bir tanesi az önce bahsettiğim gibi tarihsel arka plan. İkincisi tabii bu metni ortaya çıkartan kişinin hayat hikayesi. Üçüncüsü de metnin aslında kavgaya girdiği ve kendisini ispat etmeye çalıştığı bazı temalar. Bu aslında tabii çok zengin bir içeriğe sahip ama ben burada üç tane konuyu öne çıkartacağım. Bunlardan ilki ikinci enternasyonel Marksizmin, kaba Marksizm, yer Ortodoks Marksizm olarak Korsch'un adlandırdığı Marksizm anlayışının eleştirisi. İkincisi yöntem meselesi ve burada biraz işte Hegelcilik meselesine girmeyi düşünüyorum. Üçüncüsü de felsefenin ilgası. Bu da işte hani metnin hani en çarpıcı noktası olarak kabul edilebilir. Tabii hani burada bir felsefenin ilgası ile birlikte ortaya atılan özellikle hani son sayfalarda doğrudan dile getirdiği Korsch'un bir yeni maddecilik, yeni materyalizm tartışması var ama bu tartışmaya ben burada girmeyeceğim çünkü benden sonra Darren bu konuyla ilgili son derece özgün ve detaylı bir analiz sizlere sunacak. Ben şimdi bir Alman devrimi meselesiyle başlamak istiyorum. Tüm bu devrim dediğimiz, Almanya'da devrim dediğimiz mesele 1918 Kasım'ında Kiel'de yani Almanya'nın en kuzeyinde Danimarka sınırına yakın ama Baltık Denizi tarafında olan bir liman kentinde ortaya çıkan ayaklanma bu işi başlatıyor. Ama hani burada böyle bir aslına bakarsanız sadece böyle bir kente ait bir ufak bir şeyden bahsetmiyoruz. Yani bunun kapsamının anlaşılabilmesi için aslında Avrupa genelinde sanayileşmiş burjuva toplumları genelinde Avrupa içerisindeki burjuva toplumları geneline yayılan bizim biraz aslında özgürlüğünü unutmuş olduğumuz bir önemli bir gelişme, önemli bir devrimci atılım döneminden bahsediyoruz. Çünkü dediğim gibi yani bu zaten birazdan anlatacağım gibi Kiel'le sınırlı kalmadığı gibi aslında Almanya ile de sınırlı kalmıyor. Macaristan'dan yani daha işte zaten Sovyet Rusya'dan bahsetmiyoruz bile. Hani ama Macaristan'dan İtalya'nın kuzeyine, Almanya'nın neredeyse tamamına ama aynı zamanda ta İrlanda'ya kadar yayılan böyle bir konseyler hareketinin devrimci dalganın Avrupa'yı sardığı bir dönemde dünyanın işçi sınıfı bakımından en gelişmiş ülkesinde, en örgütlü ve en gelişmiş işçi sınıfına sahip olan ülkesinde devrimci ateşin, kıvılcımın çaktığı yer olarak Kiel'den bahsedebiliriz. Bir yıl öncesinde işte Baltık'ın kuzeydoğusunda Petrograd'da yakılan alevin aslında ve devrimci hareketin yer değiştirmesi, yani güneybatıya doğru Baltık Denizi'nin coğrafyasını düşünecek olursak güneybatıya doğru kayması söz konusu. Yeniden alevlenmesi söz konusu. Burada tabii Alman toplumunun ve işçi sınıfının artık toplumsal ilişkilerin, toplumsal gerçeğin ve yaşamın kendisinin eskisi gibi gidemeyeceğine dair çıplak gerçekle yüzleşmesi meselesi ön plana çıkıyor. Bununla birlikte hemen Kasım ayının başında Kiel'de başlayan ve işçi ve asker konseylerinin kurulmasıyla başlayan süreç hızla yayılıyor ve bir hafta içerisinde Berlin'e kadar ilerliyor. Berlin'de 9 Şubat 1918 tarihinde Spartaküslerin önderliğinde Karl Liebknecht burada Berlin Sarayı'nda Sosyalist Cumhuriyeti ilan ediyor. Bu tabii aslına bakarsanız son derece altı dolu bir hareket. Bunu şuradan anlıyoruz. Dönemin yani iktidarı bir şekilde ele geçirmiş olan hani savaşın son yakıcı döneminde iktidarı elinde tutan Sosyal Demokrat Parti bunun ne kadar önemli bir dönüşüm kapı açabileceğini fark ettiği için kendileri de yine aynı gün meclisten Scheidemann aracılığıyla daha sonrasında Weimar Cumhuriyeti olarak adlandırılacak olan Cumhuriyeti ilan ediyorlar. Burada hani demeye çalıştığım şey hani basit bir ayaklanmadan veya bir çıkıştan bahsetmiyoruz. İki dünya görüşünün, iki cumhuriyetin aslında kapışmasından bahsediyoruz. 9 Şubat'la başlayan süreç tabii maalesef hepimizin bildiği gibi yaklaşık 2 ay sonrasında Spartakist hareketin liderlerinin katli ve kurulmuş olan konseylerin bastırılmasıyla, kanlı bir şekilde bastırılmasıyla neticeleniyor. Ama bununla birlikte 8 saatlik iş günü talebinin hiperenflasyona daha sonraki yıllarda da ortaya çıkacak olan o hiperenflasyona karşı mücadelenin ve toplumun kaderinin işçi sınıfının elinde olmasına dair taleplerin gündemde bir şekilde gündemde kaldığını, dalga dalga su üstüne çıktığını ve Almanya'yı defalarca devrimin arifesine taşıdığını görüyoruz. Bunlardan ilki 1920 yılının Mart'ında gerçekleşiyor. Berlin'de yapılan yine faşist bir darbe var. Kapp-Putsch diye siyasi tarihe geçmiş olan bir darbe var. Bu darbe karşısında komünistler hatta sosyal demokratlar da dahil oluyorlar buna bu sefer. Bir genel grev ilan ediliyor. Genel grevin ilanıyla birlikte Ruhr bölgesinde yani Almanya'nın en sanayileşmiş olan bölgesinde de işçi sınıfı hareketinin ve iktidarı ele almaya yönelik biçimde işçi sınıfı örgütlerinin büyük bir katılımı ve desteği oluyor. Öyle ki darbe Berlin'de bastırıldıktan sonra bile Ruhr bölgesi hala ayaklanmış durumda. İşte bu aşamada yine sosyal demokratların saf değiştirdiklerini ve bu kalkışmayı bastırdıklarını görüyoruz. Daha sonrasında Alman Komünist Partisi 1921 ve 22 yıllarında bir topyekün dönüşüm ne karşıdan farklılaşan bir birleşik cephe stratejisi izlemeye başlıyor. İşçi konseylerini yeniden canlandırmak fakat bunu yaparken doğrudan bütüncül bir dönüşüm yerine mevcut sorunlar çerçevesinde işçi sınıfını güçlendirecek tedbirler almak üzerine bir politika inşa etmeye özen gösteriyor. Bu bir bakımdan faydalı oluyor ama bir anlamda da bu dönemdeki kalkışmaların parti tarafından kontrol edilememesine, bu devrimci hareketin ritminin parti tarafından ayarlanamamasına bir anlamda da neden oluyor ve 1923 yılına gelindiğinde artık Almanya'daki ekonomik durum son derece ağırlaşmış vaziyette. İşte 1918'de kazanılmış olan o 8 saatlik çalışma günü hakkı gasp ediliyor. Batı Almanya tekrar Fransa tarafından işgal ediliyor. Ama aynı zamanda Mark'ın, Alman parasının da çöküş durumu söz konusu. Tüm bu ekonomik gelişmeler çerçevesinde 1923'ün ilk aylarında özellikle Batı Vesfalya'da, Kuzey Ren ve Vesfalya bölgesinde, daha sonrasında da Saksonya ve Thüringen bölgesinde devrimci ayaklanmaların daha önce olmadığı kadar kuvvetli bir şekilde ortaya çıktığını görüyoruz. Fakat burada yine partinin yeteri kadar örgütlenme konusunda eksik kaldığını, aynı zamanda ideolojik önderlik yapabilme konusunda da eksik kaldığını görüyoruz. Daha sonrasında bu ayaklanmalar bir miktar çekildikten sonra hani partinin de devreye girip bu ateşi bir miktar kıstıktan sonra, çünkü kontrol edemeyeceklerini anlıyorlar. Bir tür yeni bir strateji denenmesi söz konusu oluyor ve aynı yılın ikinci yarısı içerisinde bu sefer parti önderliğinde Saksonya'da ve Thüringen'de bir devrim provası gerçekleştiriliyor. Fakat ne yazık ki bu da başarılı olmuyor ve güneydeki Bavyera'daki nasyonal sosyalistler, işte Nazilerin ve merkezi hükümetin de desteğiyle birlikte çok şiddetli bir bastırmayla Alman devrimi dediğimiz, yani dünyanın kaderini değiştirmesini bekledi o dönemki sosyalistlerin ve komünistlerin beklediği olay gerçekleşmemiş oluyor. Ve bunun niçin gerçekleşmediği, bu kadar koşulların uygun olduğu bir dönemde iktidarın niçin alınamadığı, işçi sınıfı hareketinin ve işçi sınıfının dünya görüşünün niçin muktedir kılınamadığı sorusu yakıcı bir biçimde gündeme geliyor. Bu soru tabii ki tarih ve sınıf bilinci metinlerinde de, Antonio Gramsci'nin hapishanede yazdığı, doldurduğu defterlerde de son derece başat bir soru. Ama Marksizm ve felsefe metninde de daha süreç sona ermediği halde, ermeden önce yayınlanmış bu metinde de yakıcı bir şekilde ortada olan bir soru. Şimdi bu soruyu soran kişi, yani Korsch 1886 yılında dünyaya gelen birisi. Babası bir banka çalışanı, kendisi de hukuk ve felsefe okuyor. Daha sonrasında 1912-14 yılları arasında İngiltere'ye gidiyor. Orada Fabian Society denen sosyalist örgüt içerisinde örgütleniyor. Bu dönemde ikinci enternasyonellerin henüz daha canlı olduğu bu dönemde aslında Korsch Marksist değil. Çünkü o dönemin Marksist anlayışının aslına bakarsanız sosyalist demokrasi, kendi kafasındaki demokratik sosyalizm anlayışıyla uymadığını düşünüyor. Fakat 1914 yılında Almanya'ya gelmek zorunda kalıyor ve cepheye gönderiliyor. Burada silah taşımayı reddeden birisi, tabii ki savaşa karşı olduğu için. Ancak yine de yaralanıyor bir iki kez. Daha sonrasında da işte tabii bu savaşa Sosyal Demokrat Parti'nin onay vermesiyle yaşanan bölünmede kurulan Bağımsız Sosyal Demokrat Parti içerisinde yer alıyor ve bu partide kısa bir süre sonrasında işte hem daha sonrasında konseyci komünist olarak adlandıracak gruplar ve hem Spartaküs grubu tarafından bir araya getirilen ekiplerle birlikte Alman Komünist Partisi'ni kuruyorlar ve Korsch bu partinin üyeleri arasında yer alıyor. Hatta işte hani ileriki süreçte önde gelen teorisyenlerinden de birisi oluyor. Bu dönem içerisinde hemen 1918'in işte Berlin'de ve Bavyera'da kurulan konsey cumhuriyetlerinin, sosyalist cumhuriyetlerinin ilgasında yıkılmasından sonra Korsch'un bir kitap yazdığını görüyoruz. Bunun adı, bu metnin adı toplumsallaştırma nedir? Was ist die Vergesellschaftung? Yani buradaki konu yani mülkiyetin ele geçirilmesi, bu anlamda sosyalleştirme, bunun ne olduğu meselesi tartışılıyor. E, Aynı zamanda yine 1922 yılına gelindiğinde Arbeitsrecht für Betriebsräte isimli kitabı yazıyor. Burada işte iş yeri konseylerinin emek hukuku şeklinde çevirebileceğimiz bir metin. Aslında buradaki çalışmalar boyunca ve hani bir yandan süre gelen o devrimci hareketler boyunca Korsch hem hukuk okumanın hem de felsefe okumanın getirdiği bir tür birleşim hali içerisinde, sentez hali içerisinde e, hem düşünce anlamındaki mücadelenin önemini ortaya koyuyor, örgütlenmenin önemini tartışıyor. Hem de bu örgütlenme biçiminin hani bir yanıyla da hukukçu olmanın getirdiği o pratik yanla birlikte bunun nasıl işler kılınabileceğine dair mekanizmaları tartışmaya çalışıyor. Yani en başında daha en başta bahsettiğimiz o işçi sınıfının muktedir kılınması, devrimin gerçekleştirilmesi konusunda bahsettiğimiz şeyin aslında yavaş yavaş Korsch tarafından bir şekilde pişirildiğini görüyoruz. E, Burada tabii şöyle de bir inançla yazılmış metinler bunlar. Yani devrim gerçekleşecek ama o gerçekleştiği anda yani gerçekleşmesini hem mümkün kılmak hem de gerçekleştikten sonra onu yaşatmak için sınıfın toplumu dönüştürebilmesi ve yönetebilmesi lazım. Ve bunun hukukunun şimdiden ve bunun düşüncesinin şimdiden bugünden inşa edilmesi gerekiyor ki bu başarılsın. Tabii az önce bahsettiğimiz gibi ne yazık ki gerçekleşmiyor bu süreç. Daha sonrasında da Alman Komünist Partisi'nin daha böyle bir Sovyet Komünist Partisi tarafından daha çok kontrol altına alındığını, Uluslararası Komünist Hareket içerisinde Sovyet Rus Komünist Partisi'nin ağırlığının giderek daha fazla arttığını görüyoruz. Burada tabii 1924 yılındaki Komintern toplantıları çok önemli. Burada Komintern'in hani kurucusu ve hani kurucularından ve hani başındaki kişi olarak Zinoviev doğrudan hem Korsch'u hem de Lukacs'ı hedef alıyor. Diyor ki işte bunlar işte bu kendilerini çok bir şey zanneden bu profesörler oturup işte bize Marksizm nedir? Bunun dersini anlatmaya işte kendi opportunist fikirlerini yaymaya çalışıyorlar. İşte devrim böyle bir şey değil işte hani öyle hani sizin anladığınız gibi yapılabilecek bir şey değil işte diye hem dalga geçiyor ama hem de aynı zamanda daha sonrasında bir tasfiye ya da bir boyun eğdirme süreci olacak. Korsch için tasfiye, Lukacs için de bir tür boyun eğdirme süreci olacak bu. Aynı zamanda Buharin tabii çok önemli bir isim komünist hareket içerisinde. O da Korsch'un editörlüğünü yaptığı Internationale dergisinde kendisine hakkında yapılan eleştiriler nedeniyle Korsch'u suçluyor. Böyle bir hani Alman Komünist Partisi'nin bir miktar daha kontrol altına alınabilmesi için anladığım kadarıyla Korsch ve benzeri figürler biraz tehdit olarak görülüyorlar ve bu aynı zamanda 1926 yılında kendisinin partiden ihracına kadar gidiyor. 1923'te Thüringen'de gerçekleştirilmek istenen devrim esnasında devrimci kadronun önde gelen bir isimlerinden biri Korsch. O dönemde meclis üyesi, eyalet meclisinde ve işte hani kendisine biçilen rolde devrim içerisindeki oldukça üst düzeyde birisi. 23 yenilgisinin hemen sonrasında yapılan genel seçimlerde bu sefer federal meclise seçiliyor. 1926 yılında partiden atılsa bile 28'e kadar mecliste milletvekilliği görevini yerine getiriyor. Fakat 28'den sonra aktif siyasetten çekilmek zorunda kalıyor. Yine de 1933 yılına kadar Almanya'da kalıyor. bu dönemde işte ideolojik faaliyetlere devam ediyor. Çeşitli gruplar kuruyor. Bunlar içerisinde işte mesela Bertolt Brecht'in katıldığını ve Marksizm terbiyesini Korsch'tan aldığını ve hani ömürleri boyunca hani bu arkadaşlığı sürdürdüklerini biliyoruz. Norveç'teki Komünist Parti ile İtalya'da Bordiga grubuyla Korsch'un ilişkilerini sürdürdüğünü ve enternasyonel hareket, komünist hareket içerisinde bir farklılık yaratabilmenin zeminlerini aradığını, işte Stalinistleşme politikalarına karşı ittifak arayışları içerisinde olduğunu biliyoruz. Fakat tam 1933 yılında işte Nazilerin iktidara gelmesinin ardından meclisin yakılmasıyla başlayan terör süreci içerisinde Korsch Almanya'dan ayrılıyor. Önce Danimarka'ya gidiyor. Daha sonrasında da Amerika'ya iltica ediyor. Tabii bu bir bence bir kayıp. Hani Korsch gibi büyük bir aklın Amerika'ya gitmek zorunda kalması, hani Avrupa içerisinde kalamaması, Doğu bloğu diyebileceğimiz coğrafya içerisinde kalıp faaliyet gösterememesi büyük bir kayıp. Bu yıllar içerisinde Amerika'da da önce sosyalist faaliyeti sürdürmeye çalışıyor tabii hani yayınlar aracılığıyla. Aynı zamanda Polmatik gibi konsey komünistleriyle ilişki içerisinde oluyor. Onların yayın organları içerisinde yazılar yazıyor vesaire. Fakat giderek Marksizme olan ilgisini kaybettiğini biliyoruz. Genelde hani hayat hikayesini anlatan metinlerde daha sonrasında işte hani işte Çin devrimine ve bağlantısızlar hareketine karşı bir sempati geliştirdiği söylense de genel kabul gören şey aslına bakarsanız hani Marksizmi de son yıllarda bıraktığı yönünde. Buradan tabii biraz şeye geçebiliriz. Şimdi metnin ana unsurlarına yani öne çıkarmayı düşündüğüm ana unsurlarına geçebiliriz. Burada tabii ilk öne çıkan şey ikinci enternasyonel Marksizminin yani ta 1800'lerin son çeyreğinden başlayan ama 1920'lere kadar 14'e kadar ama 20'lere kadar da etkisini sürdüren bu Marksizm anlayışının eleştirisi. Şimdi burada Lukacs'tan farklı olarak Ortodoks Marksizm kavramını negatif bir anlamda kullanıyor Korsch. Ve işte devletin ve felsefenin ortadan kalkması sorununun devrimciler tarafından yani devrimci olduğunu iddia eden Ortodoks Marksistler tarafından unutulmuş olduğunu söylüyor. Bunun da Marksizmi bir tür krize soktuğunu iddia ediyor. Çünkü söylediği şey şu, 1800'lerin ortalarından itibaren kapitalizm evrimci bir gelişim süreci yaşadı. Ama 1900'lü yıllarla birlikte artık o da krize girdi ve hareketin, karşıt hareketin, komünist hareketin devrimcileşmesi için bir fırsat ve aynı zamanda bir koşullar doğdu. Bu koşulları ama ikinci enternasyonalizmin bu yaklaşımı, ikinci enternasyonel Marksizminin bu yaklaşımı söz konusu koşulları değerlendirmeye uygun değildi. Çünkü Marx'ın sahip olduğu sosyal devrim mefhumunu ve anlayışını kaybetmişti. Bunun yerine toplumun kendi doğal yasalarının e, e, nesnel işleyiş biçimlerinin sosyalizme götüreceğini, insanları sosyalizme götüreceği anlayışı. Bu tür mekanist bir anlayış hakim kılınmıştı. Hatta Korsch bunun için hani doğrudan pozitivist bir yaklaşımdır bu diyor. Çünkü hani kendiliğinden böyle bir dönüşümün söz konusu olacağını beklemek mümkün değil. Bunu hani Lenin'in devlet ve devrim metnine baktığımızda politik anlamda da böyle olmayacağını görüyoruz. Ama bu ideolojik anlamda da felsefi anlamda da böyle değildir. Bu anlamda da mücadele etmek gerekir diyor. Tabii bu anlamda mücadelenin yöntemi ne olacak sorusu burada ortaya çıkıyor. İşte hani bugün bu kişilerin Hegelci Marksist olarak bilinmelerine neden olan bu yöntemsel farklılık ne diye sorabiliriz. Burada Hegelcilikten ve Hegel'in olumlu biçimde anılmasından bahsedecek olursak Marksizm ve felsefe yapıtı içerisinde şu iki mesele öne çıkıyor diye düşünüyorum. Bu birincisi yani bazı yerlerde hatta Hegel'in idealist bir filozof olduğu ama aslında gizliden materyalist olduğu bile iddia ediliyor Korsch tarafından. Bunun söylenmesinin nedeni de şu, felsefeyi gerçeklik ile ilişkilendirdi diyor Hegel için. Bu ilişkilendirmeyi tabii Burjuva devrimleri ve Burjuvazinin toplumsal ilerlemeci dönemi perspektifinden yaptı. Proletarya açısından yapmadı diyor. Ama bir anlamda Hegelci felsefe pratiğin teorisini sunmayı bu politik çerçeve içerisinden pratiğin teorisini sunmayı başardı diyor. Ve ikincisi de toplumsal dönüşümü bütüncül bir perspektiften anlamayı da mümkün kıldı diyor. Bu ikisinin tabii devrimci hareket tarafından, sosyal devrim teorisi olarak Marksizm tarafından miras edinilmemesi de kaçınılmazdı diyor ve Marksizm bu iki ilkeyi aldı, devşirdi diyor. Marx işte hani Hegel şöyle bir belirlenimde de bulunuyor. Diyor ki her felsefe kendi çağının düşüncede kavranışıdır şeklinde bir görüşü var. Marx ise kendi teorisini bunun bir şekilde hani dönüştürülmüş türevi olarak ele alıyor ve diyor ki toplumsal tarihsel sürecin bütününe dair genel bir ifadedir hani benim düşüncem diye yaklaşıyor. Ve de hani kısaca toplumsal devrimin toplumun tüm unsurlarını, bileşenlerini içine alacak devrimin teorisini inşa etmeye çalışıyor. Ve bu anlamda işte ideolojinin eleştirisi, Burjuva dünya görüşünün eleştirisi de en az Burjuva ekonomi politiğinin eleştirisi kadar aynı zamanda en az Burjuva siyaset biçiminin, Burjuva devletinin eleştirisi kadar önemli bir yer kapsıyor. Hatta Korsch'a göre Marksizmin, yani Marx ve Engels'in düşünsel gelişimin de olgusu çok önemli. İdeolojinin ve felsefenin aslında toplumsal maddi bir gerçeklik olarak kavranması son derece önemli. İkinci Enternasyonel Marksistlerinin unuttuğu şey de bu. Onlar hani ideolojinin ve felsefenin tamamen bir fantezi dünyası olduğu, işte kendiliğinden gelişim süreci içerisinde, devrim süreci içerisinde ortadan da yok olacağı, kaybolacağı görüşündeler. Ama Marx ve Engels ve tabii işte bu 1923'e gelindiğinde Korsch bu unsurların ideolojinin ve felsefenin Burjuvazinin dünya görüşü olan bilinç biçimlerinin maddi gerçekliğe sahip olduğunu gösteriyor. Hatta diyor ki mesela Korsch, ekonomi politiğin eleştirisi de bir ideolojik bir faaliyetti aslına bakarsanız. Devrimci bir ideolojik faaliyetti ve de bu da bir toplumsal bir gerçekliğe karşı düşüyordu. Eğer düşmüyor olsaydı bu eleştirinin kendisi devrimci mücadelenin asli bir unsuru haline gelemezdi diyor. Marx ve Engels burjuvaziye karşı, burjuva dünya görüşüne karşı bilimsel devrimci bir diyalektiği, bilimsel devrimci bir sosyalizmi örgütlemeyi önce felsefe alanından yola çıkarak başlattılar diyor. Eğer bunun bir gerçekliği olmasaydı bu alandan başlayan süreci ekonomi politiğin eleştirisine, maddi altyapıya doğru ilerletemezlerdi. Demek ki bunun da bir gerçekliği vardı diyor hatta aynı zamanda. Ve bunun üzerine de son olarak felsefenin ilgası, ortadan kaldırılması, gerçekleştirilerek aşılması. Bu da bir yanıyla Hegelci bir kavram, tanım. Bunu tartışıyor. E, Burada asıl meselenin tüm sınıflı toplum yapısıyla birlikte felsefeyi de ortadan kaldırmak olduğu söyleniyor. Ama hani felsefenin ortadan kaldırılmasının ön koşulunda tüm sınıflı toplum yapısının bütün burjuva gerçekliğinin ortadan kaldırılmasıyla mümkün olabileceğini söylüyor. Yani burada bir yine düşünce ve toplumsal hareketle arasındaki diyalektik bağın ortaya çıkartılması söz konusu. Yani burada mesele burjuva toplumlarının yarattığı kısmi sorunların çözülmesi değil, bütün bir ön koşul, ön kabulleriyle ve bütün felsefi ideolojik ilkeleriyle birlikte ama aynı zamanda tabii maddi yaşamı, üretim biçimleri ve bunu mülk edinme biçimleri, bunu e, yönetme biçimleriyle birlikte tamamen dönüşmesi gerektiğini vurgulanıyor. İşte hani felsefenin gerçekleştirilerek ilga edilmesinin koşulu olarak bu bütüncül dönüşüm ve sonrasındaki e, teorik kurucu faaliyetin altı çiziliyor. E, en- Daha sonrasında da hani Marksizmin felsefe karşısındaki tutumunun bu işte gerçekleştirerek ortadan kaldırma ve ilga etme olduğu tekrar ve tekrar vurgulanmış oluyor. Zaten süremi biraz açtığım için daha fazla detaya girmeyeyim. E, Teşekkür ederek ve Liebknecht'in Sosyalist Cumhuriyeti ilan ettiği Korsch'un da Marksizm ve Felsefe isimli başyapıtını kaleme aldığı Berlin'den selamlarımı göndererek sunuşumu tamamlayayım. Teşekkür ederim.
Ali Yalçın'a çok teşekkür ediyoruz. Bundan sonraki sunum Kevin B. Anderson'ın. Kevin Anderson'ın çalışmaları, özellikle iki önemli çalışması Lenin, Hegel ve Batı Marksizmi ile Marx sınırlarda çalışmaları Türkçe'de yayınlandı. Yordam Yayınları tarafından mutlaka istifade edilmesi gereken önemli Marksist çalışmalar. Şimdi Kevin Anderson'ın yine tarih ve sınıf bilinci ve oradaki diyalektik anlayış üzerine sunumunu izleyeceğiz hep birlikte.
Hello. Hello from Los Angeles, California. I'm going to speak today my title is History and Class Consciousness at 100, Dialectics of Liberation in Philosophy and in Life. And I want to begin by just saying what some of the new and breathtaking points that were developed by George Lukacs 100 years ago in 1923 with the publication of History and Class Consciousness. The subtitle, in a way, tells the story Studies in Marxist Dialectics, because this book was really the first widely circulated book that placed dialectics at the center of Marxism. There's the famous formulation on the first page of the book that the core of Marxism is not any particular proposition or law or conclusion, but but method, by which he means the dialectical method. And this was not something that was widely stressed in such a way to make it so central as that until Lukacs' book. Secondly, what this opens up is a direct engagement with Hegel and with German idealism and that whole tradition. So obviously Hegel, but also Kant There's a lot of engagement with the neo-Kantians, but there's a defense, if you will, of Hegel against other philosophers and other philosophical positions. The third element that is absolutely original is to place the commodity fetishism chapter or section of a Capital Volume 1 at the center of that book. No one had done that before either. If you look at the writings on Capital, I have a big volume sitting in that bookshelf. Writings on Capital during the period of the Second Internationals. There's not a single one that places commodity fetishism at the center. And this is very important because it's frankly truer today than at the time that it was written, because the raw type of, in the more developed countries technologically and industrially today, the raw type of exploitation or oppression, in the sense that workers are reduced to poverty, absolute poverty, as Engels wrote in 1844, that Irish working class children are playing in the snow in bare feet in Manchester. This kind of thing has disappeared in many parts of the world, except in very isolated areas. And then, of course, there are lots of parts of the world where it persists. But the commodity fetishism section, with its discussion of dehumanization, reification, as he called it, of the worker, this persists even with high wages. I find it amazing that with all discussion we have today in the United States, with talk of resurgence of labor, talking about economic inequality, talking about creating well-paying unionized jobs again, as opposed to precarious jobs, and people are starting after a long silence to discuss shorter hours, making the work week maybe 4 days, but still very little discussion of the dehumanization, in the sense of as Marx wrote, where human relations become as relations between things, the impersonal, bureaucratic, and then repetitive and stultifying nature of modern work. And then there's a fourth thing, and this is the one that if Lukács had just left it at that, people might have said, well, yeah, we have some philosophers around the communist movement. They're attacking the reformists. It's true, the reformists are not dialectical. I agree with that. Whatever, but it also became a self-critique for even the revolutionary Marxists. How was that? Because by the third page, he isn't just attacking undialectical thinkers, mechanical Marxists. That's an easy thing to do, but you start naming names. You name, in fact, the biggest name besides Marx himself, Friedrich Engels, and you say that there's a certain amount of mechanical materialism and positivism in Engels himself, not just the Second International, not just the reformers, not just the academics, but the revolutionaries. Now, what is the specific critique of Engels that he makes, and why is it relevant? What he says explicitly is that we cannot reduce dialectics to mere fluidity. It's the famous sentence in the preface to Capital, which a lot of people quote. I was even quoting it to my students the other day, to show that these things like the explosion in Palestine, that everything seemed so calm. The Secretary of or the National Security Advisor of the United States, Jake Sullivan, infamously said 2 weeks before that the Middle East is more calm and stable than at any time in the last 20 years. So Marx writes, society is not a solid crystal, that it's subject to change. But Engels and a lot of others, they simplified that into, well, things are fluid, not static. Well, that's true. Yes, it's true. I mean, rivers are fluid. Lots of things are fluid, but that doesn't capture the revolutionary and critical character of the dialectic. And there's two other problems with Engels that are, I think they're implied more than stated directly, but they're still there. First of all, the essay from 1886, Ludwig Feuerbach and the End of German Philosophy, where Engels says very explicitly that we have to divide philosophy into two camps, the idealist camp and the materialist camp. And the materialists are generally the ones who are more revolutionary. He makes a slight, he says, well, we have to make an exception for Hegel a little bit, but the rest of these idealists, Kant, whatever, you almost like forget about them. So therefore, Machiavelli and Hobbes are allies, whereas Kant and the other German idealists and even Hegel really aren't, because they're in that other camp. And what you lose when you do that is, for all its imperfections, what German idealism gave us, and not only in Hegel, was a much deeper notion of what freedom is. Hobbes famously said, to me, all that freedom is, you know, someone's chained up and they get to, like, you know, escape from their chains, or the water is behind a barrier, it gets to flow down. That's freedom. I don't want to hear any like more this complicated theological stuff about. He doesn't dare to say directly theology because he'd be censored, but he implies that. So, but the problem with that is any kind of visionary view of different kinds of social relations than what exists disappears, and these questions like alienation disappear in the materialist, in the crude materialism. And then finally, Engels' uncritical embrace of a kind of positivistic view of what we call today social sciences, where Engels never gave up Hegel. He would, to the end of his life, defend the dialectic, this kind of thing. But he would say, there's this one passage where he says the dialectic, the experimental method, because the experimental method of science has a sort of dialectic, I guess, where you try to prove something and then you disprove it, then you go on to the next thing. But this, of course, is so limited because the human self-conscious subject disappears, and especially and Marxists were, of course, interested in the individual human subject, and because ultimately we're all individuals, but the collective human subject, the revolutionary subject, disappears. Well, when you attack Engels like that, even today, I mean, you could go to Amazon and look at my most popular book, Marx at the Margins. The first review says, wow, this book is pretty good, but why does he have to attack Engels? So this remains, so he got pushback not just from the old neo-Kantians or reformists, but within the revolutionary camp itself. He was denounced, and he had to kind of recant. There's the infamous speech by Zinoviev in 1924 at the Comintern Congress, where he and Korsch, called Korsch, are denounced by name. There's books, I don't think it's like necessarily a direct response, but Bukharin publishes this book in 1925, Historical Materialism, that until Bukharin was purged is like a handbook of Marxism. I don't have to summarize it. I can just tell you what he says in one word. He says, I am a mechanical materialist. This is what our position should be. He says it openly. And I have to say, unfortunately, even Trotsky falls into more that mechanical materialist camp when he deals directly with questions of philosophy. Now, there's many dialectical insights in his political writings. I'm not saying there aren't, but in terms of the dialectic proper. So, Lukacs' history and class consciousness went on to influence academic and intellectual radicalism. People like the Frankfurt School, obviously, in Germany in the 1920s. In France, after World War II, people like Merleau-Ponty, who developed, well, actually by the 50s, developed this term Western Marxism, which Korsch also used. But of course, so those people, my colleagues in academia, a lot of them love Lukacs. I mean, there's fights between the people with more of that perspective and then the more Althusserian type, and the Gramscians somewhere in the middle. But it was cut off. It was cut off from I think that speech by Zinoviev really helped to cut this off from a revolutionary political Marxism. It's rare to find a socialist group that's organizing people for a Palestine demonstration nowadays to be saying to their comrades, we should be reading Lukacs' History and Class Consciousness. And it got cut off from the lineages of Lenin and Trotsky, for example. And this is a tragedy. This is a real tragedy, because what both sides forget, the generally anti-Leninist and Trotskyist academia, and those who think they understand Lenin, and if they're in the Trotsky tradition, Trotsky, was history and class consciousness direct links to Lenin, and not just in general, not just because Lukacs had become a Bolshevik, had become a revolutionary, had broken with the Second International, had opposed the war, had imposed imperialism. Not just because of that, but the actual dialectical writings by Lenin. Now, these had not been published yet in 23, but there was the essay that was published in the leading Marxist journal of the time, a multilingual journal under the banner of Marxism. Just before his death, Lenin in 1922 wrote of that Marxists, what we need is a society of materialist friends of the Hegelian dialectic. That this is what Marxist philosophy. This was a startling statement to make. It was not widely quoted by the Orthodox, but by the Marxists who came to lead these political organizations. But Lukacs actually quotes that in his preface as a justification for where he's going. And this is something that a lot of people don't even realize that he said that. I'd like to say also that my own appreciation of history and class consciousness, which was translated into English exactly 50 years ago, it's kind of or 52 years ago, so it's kind of an anniversary for that too. This came into English right at the time that my mentor, Raya Dunayevskaya, who had been a secretary to Trotsky and written on state capitalism, was publishing her deepest exploration of these issues, Philosophy and Revolution. I don't think one of her books been translated into Turkish, but I don't think this one has been. And so this is the kind of dialectical tradition that went directly back to Hegel that I grew up with, but I was strongly influenced by Lukacs' History and Class Consciousness at the same time, because I don't know how familiar people in Turkey are with C.L.R. James, but C.L.R. James and Raya Dunayevskaya started doing this in the 1940s, during and after World War II. They got hold of a copy of Lenin's philosophical notebooks, and Dunayevskaya translated it, and they were trying to publish it. They couldn't find a publisher. Neither the Trotskyist movement nor the academic presses would publish it, and but they wrote a lot about it, and so this has a common origin to what Lukacs was doing, and people don't realize this. Now, in the actual notebooks, as opposed to that brief statement of 1922 that we need to become materialist friends of the Hegelian dialectic, Lenin develops hundreds of pages of notes. They're notes on Hegel, but he makes remarks also. The two most famous remarks are that you cannot understand Marx's Capital without understanding the whole of Hegel's logic. And the second one is that's more controversial, is that consciousness or cognition not only reflects the world, but creates it. So this is a return to what Marx did in the first thesis on Feuerbach, that the revolutionary critical character is sometimes developed by idealism, because revolutionary consciousness, a vision of a new society, this helps to create the world. And of course, all of this cuts against the mechanical materialist tradition of people like Bukharin or even Trotsky. And of course, well, for the tradition that I come out of, what they did, and here trying to follow Lenin, their argument was, which I developed in my book, Lenin, Hegel, and Western Marxism, which is available in Turkish, that by delving into the dialectic, by developing, as did Lukacs, a notion of the subject, that we don't look at the world just as Hegel said, not just as object, but also as subject, and the human subject working its way and rising up, resisting inside that world. That, of course, to a Marxist, is not just subjectivity in general, but collective subjects. And what it became for Lenin was new subjects of revolution, the national liberation movements that opposed imperialism in his day. And of course, what they did, Genievskaya and James, of course, the working class, but also Black people and other oppressed minorities. There are different contexts in different countries where we have historically oppressed minorities. Not only do we need to defend their rights as Marxists, but they are revolutionary subjects that emerge alongside the proletariat that can sometimes, in certain contexts, be more revolutionary than the proletariat. Women's liberation, as it was later called, anti-colonial national movements, obviously. So this was the way that Lenin took it, and the Marxist humanists, which Genievskaya founded, were my inspiration, looked at this dialectical heritage and said, okay, let's look at the world and let's look for the collective subjects of revolution in all their variety. So this has always colored my own readings of Lukacs, Lenin, and Hegel, not just recognition of these new subjects of revolution, but also, and also these are thinking subjects, not just as individuals, but their intellectual traditions sometimes produce important dialectical work, even if it isn't explicitly grounded in Marxism. For example, the work of Frantz Fanon, who is sort of a Marxist, but doesn't, he doesn't explicitly declare himself a Marxist, and many others that we could refer to, whose work needs to be critically appropriated. So what we have here with Lukacs is a reopening of the dialectic. And then what we have with those who interpreted Lenin in the way that they did, we have an opening of that to newer and wider notions of what revolution is. Maybe it has something to do with what's called intersectionality today. In fact, I think it does. But of course, it's on a revolutionary and dialectical basis. So those are some thoughts about the anniversary of Lukacs' history and class consciousness, and how I see it in history and today. Thank you very much.
Son sunumumuz ise Darren Rosson'un Avustralyalı bir genç Marksist olan geçtiğimiz yıl veya kısa zaman önce aslında Daniel Ben Said üzerine bir çalışması, kitabı yayınlandı. 2024'te Lukacs-Korsch üzerine bir çalışması da yayınlanacak. Son dönemdeki çok önemli çalışmaları imza atan bir arkadaşımız, dostumuz. Kendisini şimdi hep birlikte izliyoruz.
Well, thanks, comrades, for hosting this wonderful event on commemorating the first Marxist Work Week with George Lukacs and Karl Korsch as some of the key participants 100 years ago. Now, I speak to you today from Bunurong country. This is unceded land, and resistance continues. So, I would have hoped to have been there with you all in person, but I speak to you from here in Naarm, Melbourne. Now, I'm going to be speaking about Karl Korsch's Marxism and philosophy, specifically the notion of new materialism that he puts forward. So I think too often in the history of Marxism, taking in the terms of its irreducible political singularities, a lack of attention has been paid to the production of the philosophical concept. Now, 100 years after the first Marxist work week, the point hasn't been resolved at all. If we take the production of the philosophical concept in terms of its varied metaphors in the history of Marxism, we could think about it in the sense of a mirror reflection, which is perhaps the most inadequate and impoverished sense, given its reliance on passivity, visual representation, a direct and pre-critical mode of adequation. Korsch called this metaphor the naive metaphysical orientation of bourgeois common sense. At the other end of the metaphoric assemblage, we could think of the production of the philosophical concept as an interventionist, reflective reconstruction. The sense of this metaphor is not to be taken as a floating construction, but a reconstruction, able to produce a form of philosophically reflective thinking between the polarities of stringent method and creative play, while respecting the limits of dialectical presentation and always already in a given concrete conjuncture with its structures of domination that it aims to overthrow. Now, why am I raising the question of the production of the philosophical concept in this talk on Korsch, focused as it is on Marxism and philosophy? Simply because the history of Marxism and philosophy, in which the essay of the same title is a key constituent feature, concerns the nature of reflective philosophical reconstruction. To capture the histories of Marxism and philosophy is to capture the terms through which the signature theoretical arguments have been made by the proper names of such singular formations of political Marxism. In the most elementary way, a work like Marxism and philosophy cannot be read through the visual metaphor of mirror reflection. Despite being a self-confessed scientific work, with Marxism and philosophy, Korsch's signature can be read under a set of concepts composed of the new materialism, this-sidedness, the materiality of practices, and what he called the coincidence of consciousness and reality, all elaborated to various degrees and with certain intensities, nevertheless featuring in his reflective and reconstructive effort of materialist philosophy, with a hope to intervene into the revolutionary conjuncture that he faced in the context of the German revolutions and the emergence of the Workers' Council's movement at the time between 1918 with the fall of the Kaiser and 1923 with, as it were, the defeat of the German Revolution, as Pierre Brouet wrote wonderfully about. To handle this theoretical content, however, concerns the qualitative nature, structure, and function of the concepts as well as the problematics underlying a work like Marxism and philosophy. Now, to briefly go over Korsch's argument in Marxism and philosophy, it's important to state that Korsch recognized that the relations of Marxism and philosophy indeed pose a theoretical and practical problem that had gone underappreciated by both bourgeois and Marxist thinkers. Within social democracy, a disjunction between philosophical and political positions resulted from this underappreciation. A convergence between Marxist and bourgeois thinkers prevailed about a non-existence of a philosophical content or any consequences for philosophical practice produced by Marx's theoretical breakthroughs. The Marxists called philosophical practice essentially a form of fantasy, while the bourgeois scholars had a series of limits that precluded them from appreciating the philosophical and theoretical content of Marx's breakthrough. Importantly, Korsch drew on Hegel for support to demonstrate the dialectical relationship between philosophy and reality, and the transition between the exit from classical German philosophy, which Korsch called the ideological expression of the revolutionary movement of the bourgeoisie, and the passing over of dialectic into a theory of so-called scientific socialism, formulated in the 1840s by Marx and Engels specifically. The transition has four elements, namely the revolutionary movement of the bourgeoisie, idealist philosophy from Kant to Hegel, the revolutionary class struggle of the proletariat, and the materialist philosophy that is Marxism. The stakes are nothing but what is to be done with the claimed overcoming or supersession of philosophy as such. And Korsch himself effectively wrote in the margins of radical philosophy and anti-philosophy. In no sense does Korsch's Marxism and philosophy present a kind of bourgeois conservative traditional form of philosophy. Instead, he's trying to problematize the nature of the philosophical and the political in light of Marx's critiques of political economy and the critiques of politics. Korsch wants to show that revolutionary practice requires the articulations of consciousness and reality throughout the different levels of modern bourgeois societies dominated by capital, and that such an orientation points in the direction of a global and comprehension overthrow of modern structures of domination. Marxism and philosophy was an intervention not so much to correct and restore Marx's authentic theory. It was rather intended to address the conjuncture of revolutionary transition into which it intervened, with the need to also resolve, importantly, the complex relations between ideology and social revolution. As I said, the German Revolution is immediately, this is the backdrop, and the Russian Revolution as well, of what Korsch is doing. This was an effort requiring the application of the materialist conception of history to Marxism itself, and an effort also to develop and elaborate the materialist dialectic in a new conjuncture of revolutionary transition. Now, what exactly is new in the new materialism that Korsch speaks about? If Korsch uses the new materialism throughout his essay, as he indeed does, then it is incumbent on his readers to discern the nature of the novelty in question and to reconstruct it beyond the limits of his own text. I have three basic thoughts about how to capture and discern the novelty in question. Firstly, an opposition needs attention between the materialism of bodies and a materialism of history, each prior to the new materialism. The opposition is the background of any possible novelty, though it does not appear explicitly in Korsch's Marxism and philosophy. I'm operating an interpretation on what he's doing. The materialism of bodies can be taken in the Hobbesian sense, as those who tried to capture the order of things as bodies in movement and give it the form of an ideal essence. So that was, one philosophical practice being to give an ideal essence at the philosophical level to the movement of bodies, so bodies in motion, and call this the English moment of materialism, which involved a reduction and an abstraction from history, however historically informed its authors undoubtedly were. The line of radical bourgeois materialism found its culmination in Jeremy Bentham and utilitarianism, but also in Feuerbach, perhaps, and the young Marx of the Holy Family. By the side of this materialism of bodies, which in a way is an expression of a radical bourgeois moment of materialism and philosophy, next to this is a somewhat competing tradition, running from Montesquieu to Adam Ferguson, the feudalistic French materialist inquiry, and the Scottish moment of philosophical investigation into modern bourgeois societies. And these authors can, in a way, or were, relied upon to advance from a materialism of bodies to that of historical materialities. It should not be forgotten that it was Montesquieu who first shows, according to Hegel, how the category of totality, and this category indeed has an important presence in Marxism and philosophy, how this category is deployed in Montesquieu to grasp a historically existing political structure. So it's with a figure like Montesquieu that the very idea of the totality comes into play to think politics or to think a political structure. This is a decisive moment in the history of materialism. Both of these are old forms of materialism, perhaps, in tension with one another, materialism of bodies, materialism of historical materialities, you could say. And now Korsch indeed posits a rupture of continuity between the old materialism and the new materialism, which is indicative of his recognition of the need to draw a line of demarcation between the new materialism and the tension between the materialism of bodies and of history. Korsch, in some ways, may have difficulty identifying the new materialism and the nature of the new adequately. However, his resolution, especially in many years after the publication of Marxism and philosophy, his resolution would go in the direction of what he called the principle of historical specificity. However, in the second instance, the novelty in question concerns a reflective element, in the sense that Korsch takes his stand specifically on the terrain of Kant's transcendental break and Hegel's effort to continue the transcendental break on the terrain of the concrete specificities of modern bourgeois societies and its practices, history, art, politics, and the sciences. One consequence of Korsch's positioning is the effort to advance the new materialism along the line of its Kantian break and its Hegelian conjunction, ensuring no retreat back into a naive realism that relies on an adequation or a correspondence theory of truth that draws a sharp line of division between consciousness and its object. This is one of the key features of Marxism and philosophy, and it's a precise point at which he was attacked by the Bolshevizing or the Stalinizing Comintern when he also became a dissident, an anti-Stalinist dissident. However, Korsch did not formulate his relationship to the reflective turn, the Kantian breakthrough properly, but I think it can be reconstructed. It's decisive, and taking into consideration, it can be and must be taken into consideration in the efforts to recollect the Hegelian forms of thought that were indeed in some way, at some level, present within Marxism and philosophy, and was a key feature of the first Marxist working week. The nature of the materialist dialectic required interrogations about its form and its relationship to Hegel and Kant as well. The third element, discerning the novelty, can be captured in the following set of concepts or problematics, as they feature in Marx's polemical notes against Feuerbach. Firstly, the turn to this sidedness, and secondly, revolutionary practice. Korsch had argued in some of his educational writings in the early 1920s, but also in Marxism and philosophy, that this sidedness and practice were constituent features of Kant, Fichte, and Hegel's philosophical political interventions when they expressed, if you wish, the revolutionary moment of the bourgeois revolutions. Korsch's efforts, however, went in the direction of thinking the limits of such figures, of such features too, namely the kind of bourgeois, irreducible, transcendent moments of their operations, and their affirmation of the structures of modern bourgeois societies and the forms of domination, primarily but not exclusively, over labor power within them. Korsch also identified the implicit presence of the coincidence of consciousness and reality throughout Marx's critique of political economy and revolutionary politics. Though these three elements, this-sidedness, revolutionary practice, and the coincidence of consciousness and reality, intersect and are more complex than schematically outlined, they are a certain set of moving parts throughout Korsch's theoretical thinking. Now, I think, though, we can also take a certain critical distance from Korsch's essay in some way. And I want to set this up in a specific way. Namely, that I think there is a problem, whether it's major or not is another question, but nonetheless, a problem with Korsch's focusing on Marx's critical notes on Feuerbach. It's a problem that runs through, I think, the efforts to come to terms with the relations of Marxism and philosophy throughout the 20th century and into the new century. And to be as blunt as possible, the so-called theses on Feuerbach are taken to be the site of the decisive confrontation with hitherto existing philosophy, in which the philosophy of praxis emerges, though this concept or this phrase of the philosophy of praxis is not one that Korsch necessarily held on to fast. He did not hold fast onto this term. But it is certainly not, I think the theses on Feuerbach are not necessarily the only or most decisive point or site in which a confrontation between philosophical, speculative thought and the effects of Marxian critique should take place. And I think it's an elementary misrepresentation to characterize Marx's new materialism as a philosophy of praxis simply as such. In Korsch's Marxism and philosophy, the elementary error is somewhat present when he tries to articulate the nature of the new materialism on the basis of the thesis on Feuerbach. And yet, however, certain other solutions to this problem are present in his text, which base themselves on Marx's dual critiques. And I think this is the direction in which Korsch's theoretical thinking, which, really, there's a high point in Marxism and philosophy, but there are also different moments of theoretical intensity that he articulates. So 1928, when he loses his Reichstag mandate, after being expelled from the German Communist Party for opposing the Stalinist scourge of the party and what was happening in Russia, Korsch began a new creative, experimental phase of his theoretical thinking that then crystallizes in a work like Karl Marx that he wrote in the mid-30s, and I think is one of the most lucid, theoretically brilliant works of the interwar period of Marxism. And it's most certainly a work that is underappreciated. We need, however, instead, and I think what I'm doing here is going beyond Korsch's own Marxism and philosophy. And so we need to read through and beyond writers like Korsch to come to know and specify the emergence of the specific autonomous objects of the critique of politics and the critique of political economy. The critique of political economy, of course, is constituted and provisionally concluded in Capital, which is the specific site of the object in question. While the critique of politics is open and elusive, requiring even a wager on its existence, though in definite need of attention. As an autonomous object, the critique of political economy, of course, emerged in its strong sense throughout the 1850s, at the earliest, perhaps, before which Marx was only applying philosophical criticism of political economy and remained in many regards or many respects as a critical Ricardian. To take the critique of political economy seriously as an autonomous object is to refrain from generally subsuming it into what's called the understanding of, in the Hegelian kind of Verstand and Vernunft distinction, which constitutes a form of exploitation, one could call it, the philosopher's exploitation of a constituted epistemic rupture signed by Marx's proper name. Instead, we return to the critique of political economy, initially in a Kantian sense, while not remaining there, of course, to ask about the effects in philosophy Marx's epistemic rupture of the critique of political economy had inaugurated, and what kinds of reflective philosophical practices might be necessary to work through its effects. In this sense, we have the philosophical Nachdenken in the twofold sense of thinking after in time, and the effort to grasp after a real process revealed by the critique of political economy. This moves in the direction of the scientific precision of capital and any of its gaps being potentially identified as a constituted discovery and a real elaboration of a science with its mode of systematic theory building and production of knowledge, and indeed posits another object, the object of the critique of politics, which requires elaboration. In terms of the critique of politics, I contend that Korsch's opposition to the anarcho-syndicalists, so the syndicalists' so-called transcendental underestimation of the state, of the modern bourgeois state, which he identifies in Marxism and philosophy, and Korsch's efforts to think the spectrum of state theory from the left to the right of social democracy. These are all entry points to rediscovering, and I emphasize rediscovering, the critique of politics. Indeed, Marxism and philosophy was conceived of as a restoration and development of a philosophical theory analogous to Lenin's State and Revolution. Lenin's work, of course, was a pivotal moment in the rediscovery of the critique of politics. It should be clear that I am cross-checking the critique of politics against the Marxism and philosophy. I want to show that the traces of this object are present, despite the fact that Korsch never formulated the object of the critique of politics explicitly and only circled around it, having no adequate terms to express it, but the circling around this object was extremely precious and important. The assumption that I'm working with is that the critique of politics is an object of Marx's epistemic breakthroughs, but this remained incomplete and it was left to posterity. Essentially, it was also forgotten largely in the Second International, and again rediscovered primarily by Lenin in State and Revolution. And if my argument is true, then it poses anew the relations of philosophical practice and such epistemic ruptures signed by Marx's proper name. Now, I have raised the specification of the two objects of critique, partly because of a general confusion that I think continues to mark interpretations of Korsch's Marxism and philosophy. The confusion concerns the idea of a re-Hegelianization of Marx or a philosophizing of Marx, to the detriment of his irreducible scientific objects and, importantly, the specific nature of a proletarian revolution, which cannot be grasped in some kind of Hegelian general theory of history or a Hegelian general theory of revolution. These are essentially expressions of the bourgeois revolutions in their radical and conservative, or their phases of passive revolution. These should not be superimposed onto the irreducibly singular or specific nature of a working class revolution, which has new tasks and a different structure. What I claim in its most basic sense is that Korsch undertakes a twofold operation in Marxism and philosophy that cannot be captured properly with the idea of the re-Hegelianization of Marx. Instead, Korsch recollects the Hegelian moment, which is a specific set of thought determinations, while demarcating, drawing a dividing line from this Hegelian moment from the Marxian. So we have a recollection and demarcation. If one drops recollection, the Hegelian resources Korsch hauls back into interpretation are mistaken. If one drops demarcation, one absorbs the Marxian into the Verstand, standing off against the illusory mastery of philosophical reason, with one effect being a misrecognition of the structures of domination in modern bourgeois societies and their theoretical articulations. I think it is important to explore the different byways, the different paths that actually give sense and truth to this operation of recollection and demarcation. And I shall go into more detail about these two moments. Korsch's relationship to Hegel needs to be specified. We have a relationship primarily centered on the philosophy of right. We know that Korsch was working through Hegel's philosophy of right about the time when he wrote Marxism and Philosophy. Korsch also drew upon Hegel's mode of scientific philosophical construction, initially in the sense of a Wissenschaft, as an early resource of conceptual construction with Hegelian thought determinations. Despite the visibility of Hegel's other writings in Marxism and philosophy, the philosophy of right is a key to grasping the Hegelian recollection, because the philosophy of right is a reconstructed logic of modern bourgeois societies in which modern bourgeois history works through the very texture of the concept. It presents the possibility of a conceptualization or a logical reconstruction of modern bourgeois societies. It comes to terms with the relative autonomy of the modern bourgeois state apparatus, and also acknowledges the non-possibility of an ideological synthetic closure owing to the persistent deprivation and resentment of the so-called rabble. That layer of modern bourgeois society that Hegel recognized could never be satisfied, but could indeed revolt, and this horrified him. As a conceptualization of modern bourgeois societies, and decisively an affirmation of them, Hegel's philosophy of right is the point of demarcation against which Marx's critique of political economy and Marx's critique of politics operate. In terms of Korsch's materialist demarcation, I have several elements in mind, some of which involve fragile points of Marxism and philosophy. First, Korsch refers to capital as a theoretical comprehension of the historical. This passage has decisive consequences. The notion of comprehension here is essentially the Hegelian notion of comprehension as begreifen, which operates against a form of abstract understanding that splits capital, the book, into history on the one side and economic theory on the other. However, Korsch situates this form of comprehension in terms of the critique of political economy, which implicitly recognizes that a philosophy of history, as articulated by the speculative philosophers, is not the last word of the historical. A philosophy of history based on its Hegelian form and a theoretical comprehension of the historical based on the critique of political economy requires fine subtlety, and also requires a subtle distinction is at stake. It requires a subtle distinction, a fine and subtle distinction. And I do not think the answer involves exchanging a philosophy of history with a general so-called science of history. These ideological discourses could hardly be discerned from one another. And to read Korsch today is to think beyond these ideological discourses, these limits that are placed on revolutionary thought. So I want to draw something else out from Korsch, the rational insight concerning the relationship between the critique of political economy and modern bourgeois societies in history. Again, at stake is an operation of specification, drawing out the relationship between the critique of political economy and modern societies in which a specific mode of production, a specific mode of domination dominates or prevails, to play on Marx's notion in the German of Herrschen. The key here is to interrupt the historical as subsumed or absorbed into a philosophy of history or a science of history, for that matter. Korsch read, in this sense, Hegel critically, insofar as he refused this subsumption or this absorption of the historical into an ideological discourse. Korsch recognizes the role of the modern bourgeois state apparatus in any conjunction or combination of philosophy and history, which is the modern bourgeois state apparatus needs to be understood, I think, as the unrivaled, adaptable, and transformative entity that remains capable of reproducing the prevailing relations of domination. This is the very nature of the modern bourgeois state, and Korsch grasps that there is a big problem for his operation of demarcation here, exactly here, because the demarcation is required from the Hegelian philosophy of history precisely because it assumes that a philosophy of history cannot adequately think the interruption, that is to say, the revolutionary overthrow, essentially, of the reproduction of modern bourgeois forms of domination. Thus, Korsch must show that and how the historical can be, as it were, liberated from the Hegelian speculative philosophy of history and the philosophy of right, which are indexed to the reproduction of modern bourgeois forms of domination. To do so, he had to demonstrate a new modality of theoretical construction and how this relates to proletarian liberation that is not reducible to the bourgeois revolution and its mechanisms of reproduction. Before concluding, I want to raise two final theoretical questions that have themselves been raised since the publication of Marxism and philosophy. The first is the question of expression. The second is what's called the empiricist conception of knowledge. And my purpose is to put them into any interpretation of Marxism and philosophy, precisely because these questions, I think, have been important and pertinent in the 100 years since the publication of Marxism and philosophy. And any effort to read a work like Marxism and philosophy at the theoretical level, and mind you, throughout this talk, I have spoken very little about the historical context or the political content, both of which are essential and important to understand the text. But I think at the theoretical level, which is an unambiguously theoretical level, one needs to think about the problems that have been raised in the history of Marxism in reading a text like this, to appreciate it, I think, adequately. Though time does not permit me to do an extensive excavation at this level, what I want to do is essentially simple. Firstly, the question of expression has been unresolved at the theoretical level throughout the history of Marxism and philosophy. To briefly lay it out, we know the classic formulation of expression takes place in a series of passages from Marx's writings of the 1840s. Those writings like The Poverty of Philosophy, the polemics against Proudhon, the most famous then of the Communist Manifesto, in which Marx and Engels, of course, argue that communist theory is nothing but the general expression of the really existing proletarian movement. So immediately we have an argument about theory being an expression of the factual reality of class struggle. While an expressive notion of truth has a presence in Marxism and philosophy, or is invoked in his argument, too little attention has been paid to the fact, and this is after Marxism and philosophy, so the fact that Korsch himself would re-question the nature of expression. And Korsch effectively prized apart, or took apart, separated any harmonious and naive understanding of expression, drawing out essentially the difficulty or the impasse of the expressive thesis, or the thesis about expression. And effectively showing the limits of any argument that when factually existing class struggles unfold, there is a direct expression of them. Instead, he argues that the form of theory encountering these class struggles unfolding is a composite of the past, producing in turn a conflict between the novelty of the factual relations of class struggle in the present and the anachronistic, the bygone, composite kind of theoretical articulations that tend then to take on an ideological character as elements to be implemented into the movement, but which do not express the movement as such. In the second instance, the empiricist conception of knowledge, tentatively sketched out but not fully elaborated, of course, by Louis Althusser, is relevant to Korsch because of the idea that he was a hermeneutic historicist thinker. So the idea that Korsch was a historicist essentially rests on this idea. And because Marxism and philosophy challenged the naive realism of bourgeois consciousness, and thus tried to overcome what's called the myth of the given, or the given of modern bourgeois societies in the way they falsely appear, or the false evidences of modern bourgeois societies, Korsch essentially opposed those who treated thought and the immediate given as substances independent of each other. The empiricist conception of knowledge reproduces the false evidences of modern bourgeois societies, and in that sense, it is a structured practice of knowledge that functions in two ways. First, by constructing a theory in such a way that it needs to point to the false evidences for its grounds and proofs. It needs to point to the false appearances, or the appearances of modern bourgeois societies, and this makes it a theory that operates in a kind of a slavish way of producing knowledge oscillating between thinking and the false immediacy of the given appearances of bourgeois societies. And secondly, the empiricist conception of knowledge operates in the illusion that it can extract an essence out of the existence of modern bourgeois societies by way of an abstraction and somehow possess such an essence of the real. Korsch himself was somewhat unclear or compromised on the second point. Therefore, it remains a point to continue to interrogate because it matters for the status of theory in the history of Marxism and philosophy, what it means to do theory and how theory relates then to politics and revolutionary practice. Yet faced with this dual operation, Korsch's reflective materialist practice was aware of itself as an intervention into a specific revolutionary context, handling the forms of the production of knowledge adequate to Marx's critiques of political economy and critiques of politics, and the efforts to overturn the false evidences of modern bourgeois societies through theoretical articulation and the revolutionary overthrow of the capitalist mode of production. These were the decisive stakes, I think, essentially, of Korsch's Marxism and philosophy, which is why one of the central key components of the essay was to solve, in the last instance, the relationships between ideology and social revolution, which is the question par excellence, not only of revolutionary politics, because without it, a transition to a communist mode of production is perhaps not thinkable or practical or possible. But on the other hand, also, it pertains to thinking about the materialist dialectic, because a materialist dialectic without an idea or a conception of the revolutionary overthrow of capital and the ideological question that must be answered with this, a materialist dialectic without these is effectively null and void. So I think I'll leave it there. Thank you very much, and I hope it was comprehensible and to your liking.
Darene'de bu canlı sunumu, bu değerli ve kapsamlı sunumu için tekrar teşekkür ediyoruz. Konferansımız burada sona eriyor. Öncelikle tabii ki Laborans ekibine tüm yani çevirilerinden bütün lojistik desteğine kadar her türlü işle ilgilenen sevgili dostlarımıza çok teşekkür etmek istiyoruz. Aynı zamanda İstos yayınlarına da çok teşekkür ediyoruz katkıları için. Tabii ki diyalektik ve Marksizm konusu bu şeyle birlikte bu konferansla tükenmiyor. Dediğimiz gibi bu alanda çalışan çok değerli dostlarımız Türkiye'de de var. Ve önümüzdeki yıllarda da benzer çalışmaları hep birlikte daha kapsamlı biçimde, daha kolektif bir çalışmayla belki de yapmayı tasarlıyoruz. Hoşça kalın diyelim. Teşekkürler.